Following for some time tonight, an arrest made days after the killing of a Vancouver mom and her 8-year-old daughter.
Our Joelle Jones in Vancouver with the latest on this heartbreaking story.
Kirkland Warren, the ex-boyfriend of Michelle Melendez, has now been charged with her murder, along with the murder of her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. A spokesperson for the family tells us they're at a loss for words as they get ready to bury the Vancouver mother and daughter together after a crime they say never should have happened.
My babies were failed by the system. And that's from Nicole.
On March 12, 2023, 27-year-old Michelle Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart, vanished from their last known location near Vancouver Mall Drive in Vancouver, Washington, USA, after leaving with Michelle's ex-boyfriend, Kirkland C. Warren, a man with a documented history of violence and legal entanglements. Within days, concerns escalated. Family members reported no contact, and a welfare check at Michelle's apartment found only her dog. Investigators recovered Michelle's vehicle nearby, prompting a focused inquiry on Warren, who had breached a protective order naming Michelle as a protected person and was taken into custody on unrelated charges. More evidence emerged during search warrants, including forensic material in Warren's vehicles. Days later, what began as a missing persons case shifted with the discovery of 2 bodies in a secluded rural area near Washougal, Washington. Authorities have since pursued a complex, evolving investigation into their deaths.
Now, mourners honoring the lives of a mother and daughter shot and killed in Washougal. Michelle Melendez and 7-year-old Layla Stewart laid to rest today in Vancouver. Now to our Jenny Hansen here now to show us how they're being remembered. Jenny.
Yeah, Liz, it's a story we've covered extensively here on Coin 6. Michelle and her daughter found dead back on March 22nd in Washougal. Well, today's event, not about how they died, but instead about their lives. Family and local leaders joined the mourners at Evergreen Memorial Gardens, and they shared memories of them and prayers. Now, the family of Michelle and Layla say they will be remembered as more than victims.
I always will remember Layla, her incredible imagination and love for scary movies. You know, throw it up for that little dude Chucky. Man, I didn't understand that. I didn't mess with that little dude, but she loved him.
Friends and family spoke for over an hour. We will have much more from today's ceremony tonight at 11. Now, meantime, the man accused in their deaths faces charges of first-degree murder. Kirkland Warren is being held in jail on no bail. He pleaded not guilty yesterday. Now, Warren returns to court next month, and of course, we'll continue to follow that case. Liz, Jeff.
Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin.
I'm not Roxy. I just need that nip.
Michelle Melendez was a 27-year-old woman living in Vancouver, Washington. She resided in an apartment complex in Clark County and was the primary caregiver to her young daughter. Her daily life centered on maintaining stability for her household, while managing personal safety concerns connected to a prior relationship. Those who knew her described her as focused on protecting her child and attempting to create distance from a volatile past. Michelle's family structure consisted primarily of herself and her daughter, Layla Stewart. She handled all major responsibilities, including housing, transportation, scheduling, and childcare. There was no indication that another adult lived in the home. Her role as a single parent placed her in charge of decision-making, safety planning, and day-to-day structure for her child. Her daily routines were predictable. She maintained contact with family members, coordinated her daughter's school schedule, and stayed connected with a limited social circle. Communication with relatives was regular enough that sudden silence raised immediate concern. Michelle did not exhibit patterns of disappearing or disengaging from her responsibilities. Parenting was central to her daily life. She handled school drop-offs, meals, supervision, and medical needs. Layla was consistently under her care, and Mishi rarely left her daughter with others. This pattern made the circumstances surrounding their disappearance inconsistent with prior behavior. Mishi's social circle was relatively small and consisted mostly of family members and close contact aware of her personal circumstances. Those close to her were aware of tension stemming from a prior romantic relationship and had observed changes in her behavior related to safety. These included heightened caution, selective communication, and legal steps taken to protect herself. Her relationship history included a prior romantic involvement with Kirkland Warren. The relationship was unstable and marked by repeated conflicts. Over time, the dynamic shifted from interpersonal disagreements to documented safety concerns. The instability was not isolated or brief, but developed over an extended period. Safety concerns became prominent prior to her disappearance. Mishi had expressed fear related to Warren's behavior and took steps to protect herself through legal channels. These measures were not informal, but involved documented court actions, indicating that the perceived threat was serious enough to require intervention. Protective measures included obtaining a domestic violence protection order that legally restricted Warren from contacting or approaching her. These orders were intended to establish physical distance and prevent further escalation. Despite these measures, the threat did not fully resolve. Mishi attempted to distance herself from Warren by limiting contact, changing routines, and relying on legal enforcement rather than personal negotiation. These actions indicate a deliberate effort to disengage and regain control over her environment. However, continued violations of court orders undermined these attempts and contributed to ongoing risk. Layla Stewart was a 7-year-old child who lived full-time with her mother, Mishi Melendez. Due to her age, she was entirely dependent on adult supervision and decision-making. Her daily life revolved around school attendance, time at home, and routine childcare. Layla attended school regularly and followed a structured daily routine managed by her mother. There was no indication of behavioral or attendance issues prior to the disappearance. Her routine was stable and predictable, reinforcing that her absence was not voluntary or accidental. Her relationship with her mother was defined by constant proximity and reliance. Mishi was Layla's primary and consistent caregiver. There was no shared custody arrangement or routine transfer of care to another adult. Layla's safety, movement, and supervision were directly tied to her mother's actions. Living arrangements placed Layla in the same apartment as Mishi. There was no indication that Layla stayed elsewhere overnight or spent extended time away from her mother. This made their joint disappearance particularly concerning, as neither had a known reason to be absent simultaneously. As a child, Layla had limited autonomy and no independent means of communication or transportation. She relied entirely on adults for protection, food, shelter, and decision-making. These vulnerability factors significantly increase her risk in any unstable or violent situation. Layla's ability to seek help independently was extremely limited. She could not legally make decisions, remove herself from danger, or access assistance without adult intervention. This placed full responsibility for her safety on the adults around her. Kirkland Warren was identified as Mishi Melendez's former romantic partner. His background included a prior criminal history and repeated interactions with law enforcement. These interactions predated the disappearance and were documented through official records. The relationship between Warren and Mishi was characterized by imbalance. Reports and court records describe a dynamic involving control and intimidation. Mishi's efforts to disengage were met with continued contact attempts despite legal restrictions. Legal history between the two included documented domestic violence incidents. These incidents led to the issuance of protection orders intended to prevent further harm. The existence of these orders demonstrates that authorities had previously determined a credible risk. Warren violated court orders multiple times. These violations included continued communication and physical proximity prohibited by law. Each violation represented an escalation in risk rather than a resolution. Despite restrictions, Warren remained in contact with Mishi in the period leading up to the disappearance. This continued interaction contradicted the legal intent of protective orders and indicated ongoing instability. Behavioral indicators showed increasing volatility. Repeated disregard for court orders, coupled with prior violent behavior, suggested a pattern of escalation rather than de-escalation. The final known movements of Mishi and Layla occurred in mid-March 2023. Mishi was last confirmed at a known location in Vancouver, Washington. Kirkland Warren was present during the final known interaction. Witness observations describe Mishi as being in a physically vulnerable state at the time she was last seen. Accounts noted her condition raised concerns about her ability to leave independently or make decisions freely. Warren's behavior during this period drew attention due to his proximity to Mishi despite existing court restrictions. His presence contradicted the legal boundaries established to keep them apart. The departure occurred using a vehicle associated with Warren. The direction of travel was not immediately clear, contributing to early uncertainty in the investigation. No confirmed destination was reported. Following this departure, communication ceased. Calls and messages to Mishi went unanswered. This silence was inconsistent with her established communication patterns. Family members noticed the absence quickly. Missed calls, lack of response, and failure to follow routine schedules triggered concern. These warning signs prompted efforts to locate Mishi and Layla and eventually led to law enforcement involvement. The combination of prior safety concerns, legal history, and sudden loss of contact elevated the case beyond a routine missing persons report and set the stage for a broader investigation. Concern began when Mishi Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart, failed to maintain routine communication with family members. Mishi was known to be consistent in responding to calls and messages, particularly regarding her child. When hours passed without contact, relatives attempted to reach her directly. Phone calls went unanswered, and messages were not returned. As time passed, the lack of communication became increasingly inconsistent with Mishi's established behavior. Family members began retracing Mishi's recent movements. They contacted friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have seen Mishi and Layla last. These efforts yielded limited information. No one reported recent interaction with the pair after the previous night. The absence of confirmation regarding their whereabouts raised further concern. A police welfare check was requested at Mishi's apartment in Vancouver, Washington. Officers entered the residence to determine whether Mishi and Layla were inside or in need of assistance. Inside the apartment, officers observed signs that the residence had not been abandoned intentionally. Personal belongings were present, including clothing and household items. Mishi's dog was found inside, unattended. The presence of the dog was notable, as Mishi was known not to leave the animal alone for extended periods without arranging care. There were no indications that Mishi and Layla had packed belongings for travel or relocation. No note was found explaining an absence. Essential items, typically taken when leaving voluntarily, appeared to remain inside the apartment. The residence showed no signs of forced entry or visible struggle, but the absence of both occupants under these conditions prompted concern. At this stage, the case shifted. What initially could have been interpreted as a voluntary absence no longer aligned with the observable facts. The combination of sudden loss of contact, unattended personal responsibilities, and the presence of dependents, including a child and a pet, led investigators to reclassify the situation as a missing persons case with potential safety risks. Law enforcement expanded efforts to locate both individuals. As the investigation progressed, officers located Mishi Melendez's vehicle several days after the welfare check. The vehicle was found parked away from her residence in an area inconsistent with her daily routine. The location raised questions about how and why the vehicle had been left there. An external examination of the vehicle showed no immediate signs of collision or mechanical failure. However, the placement of the vehicle did not align with normal parking behavior. Investigators documented the position of the car, surrounding environment, and time since it was last seen in use. A closer inspection revealed indicators that warranted further examination. The interior showed signs of disturbance inconsistent with routine use. Certain personal items expected to be present were missing, while others remained. The vehicle did not contain Mishi or Layla, nor did it provide immediate clarity on where they had gone. The separation of the vehicle from its owner and occupants significantly altered the investigative timeline. It suggested that Mishi and Layla did not simply leave together and abandon the vehicle voluntarily. Instead, the circumstances implied an interruption in normal activity. Investigators began mapping the last confirmed movements associated with the car, comparing them to witness statements and available surveillance data. The discovery of the vehicle became a pivotal moment in the case. It narrowed the window in which the disappearance likely occurred and suggested that additional parties may have been involved. From this point forward, investigators focused on identifying individuals who had contact with Mishi and Layla shortly before the vehicle was abandoned. Attention quickly turned to Kirkland Warren, identified as the last known individual seen with Mishi and Layla prior to their disappearance. Warren had a prior personal relationship with Mishi and was known to law enforcement due to previous legal issues. Investigators established that Warren had been in contact with Mishi shortly before she and Layla were last seen. Witness accounts placed all three together during the final confirmed sighting. This positioned Warren as a person of interest early in the investigation. Shortly after the missing persons report, Warren was taken into custody on unrelated charges. The timing of his arrest coincided closely with the period in which Mishi and Layla disappeared. Authorities confirmed that Warren had outstanding legal issues, including violations of court order restrictions. Following his arrest, investigators obtained and executed multiple search warrants connected to Warren. These warrants covered vehicles associated with him, as well as electronic devices believed to contain relevant information. During searches of the vehicles, investigators recovered materials of evidentiary value. This included biological material requiring forensic analysis, personal belongings linked directly to Mishi and Layla, and items not typically present during routine vehicle use. The recovery of these materials strengthened the connection between Warren and the disappearance. Searches also uncovered ammunition and firearms. These discoveries were documented and analyzed to determine their relevance to the ongoing investigation. The presence of weapons escalated concerns regarding the safety of the missing individuals. Electronic devices seized during the searches included mobile phones. These devices were secured for digital analysis to reconstruct communications and movements leading up to the disappearance. Forensic processing of the recovered vehicles was conducted methodically. Investigators documented and collected biological evidence, including blood traces found within one of the vehicles. The presence of blood contradicted any theory of a voluntary disappearance and suggested physical harm. Trace materials, such as fibers and residue, were collected to establish contact between individuals and locations. Each item was cataloged to preserve chain of custody and support later forensic testing. Digital analysis played a critical role in reconstructing events. Investigators extracted data from seized cell phones, including call logs, text messages, application usage, and location services. This data allowed authorities to establish timelines that either supported or contradicted statements provided during the investigation. Internet search histories were examined. Certain search activity raised investigative concern due to its timing and relevance. These searches were compared against known movements and evidence recovered from physical locations. Location data from mobile devices enabled investigators to track movement patterns across specific time frames. This information was cross-referenced with surveillance footage, license plate readers, and witness statements to corroborate or challenge assumptions. Communication records provided insight into the final interactions between Mishi, Layla, and Warren. Gaps in communication aligned to the estimated time of disappearance, further reinforcing the emerging timeline. By combining forensic evidence, digital data, and witness accounts, investigators constructed a cohesive sequence of events. Each element reinforced the conclusion that Mishi and Layla did not disappear voluntarily, and that their last known contact with Kirkland Warren was central to the case. At this stage, the investigation had transitioned fully from a missing persons inquiry to a criminal investigation, supported by converging lines of evidence that pointed toward intentional actions rather than unexplained absence. On March 22, 2023, a civilian traveling through a remote area outside Washougal, Washington, contacted authorities after noticing two human figures positioned off the roadway. At first glance, the individual believed the figures resembled discarded mannequins due to their stillness and placement. Upon closer observation, the caller realized the figures were human bodies and immediately contacted emergency services. The report prompted a rapid response from local law enforcement and emergency personnel. Due to the ongoing missing persons investigation involving Mishay Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart, officers were already operating under heightened awareness, though the caller was not initially aware of the connection. The bodies were located in a rural, wooded area characterized by minimal foot traffic and limited residential development. The site was several miles from main roadways, accessible primarily by vehicles familiar with the terrain. The surrounding area consisted of trees, uneven ground, and sparse visibility from passing traffic, making the location difficult to observe without intentionally stopping. Investigators later noted that the area's isolation reduced the likelihood of immediate discovery and suggested deliberate placement rather than accidental exposure. Upon securing the scene, officers established a perimeter and began documenting environmental conditions and physical evidence. The terrain showed no signs of a struggle occurring at the location itself. There was no indication that the victims attempted to flee or defend themselves at the site where they were found. The bodies were positioned close to one another, suggesting they were placed intentionally rather than arriving at the site independently. Both were fully clothed. There was no evidence of prolonged exposure or animal interference that would have significantly altered the scene prior to discovery. The positioning did not indicate an attempt to conceal the bodies through burial or covering. Instead, investigators interpreted the placement as an effort to leave them in a location unlikely to be encountered quickly. Due to the advanced state of the investigation, authorities suspected the bodies could belong to Mishay Melendez and Layla Stewart shortly after discovery. Identification was conducted through a combination of visual confirmation, personal characteristics, and forensic methods. Positive identification was later confirmed through official channels, notifying family members and formally closing the missing persons phase of the case. Once identities were confirmed, the case was formally reclassified from a missing persons investigation to a double homicide investigation. Jurisdictional coordination between local police departments and prosecuting authorities increased, and resources were redirected toward evidence consolidation and suspect prosecution. Autopsies were conducted by the county medical examiner. Both deaths were ruled homicides caused by gunshot wounds. Layla Stewart sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Mishay Melendez sustained 1 gunshot wound to the head. The nature and placement of the wounds indicated close-range firearm use. No defensive injuries were documented. Based on forensic analysis, including lividity, body temperature, and decomposition markers, the medical examiner estimated that both victims were killed within a time frame consistent with their disappearance. The findings align with investigators' reconstructed timeline, derived from witness statements, digital data, and vehicle movement analysis. Following confirmation of cause and manner of death, authorities formally classified the case as a double homicide. This designation triggered expanded prosecutorial involvement and preparation for formal charges. Investigators expanded the scope of charges against Kirkland Warren, who had already been taken into custody on unrelated violations. The prosecution sought multiple counts reflecting the severity and circumstances of the crimes. The charges ultimately included aggravated first-degree murder in the death of Layla Stewart, second-degree murder in the death of Mishay Melendez, additional violent offenses, including sexual crimes involving a minor. The distinction between murder charges reflected statutory classifications based on victim age, circumstances, and aggravating factors. Investigators recovered biological material from vehicles associated with the suspect. Blood evidence matched the victims through forensic testing. Personal belongings, including identification linked to Mishay Melendez, were also recovered. Cell phone data placed the suspect in locations consistent with the timeline of the crimes. Internet search history, communication records, and device activity demonstrated behavior aligned with post-offense actions rather than attempts to locate missing individuals. Ballistic analysis linked ammunition recovered during searches to the weapon type used in the killings. DNA evidence further supported the prosecution's case, particularly in relation to additional charges involving Layla Stewart. Kirkland Warren appeared in court under heavy security. Bail was denied due to the severity of charges and prior violations of court orders. Prosecutors outlined the evidence framework, while defense counsel entered initial responses. As evidence was reviewed and finalized, Prosecutors filed aggravated charges reflecting the intentional and violent nature of crimes. The inclusion of child-related offenses elevated the case to one carrying mandatory life sentencing provisions. Defense motions focused on procedural challenges and evidence admissibility. Prosecutors responded with comprehensive disclosures and forensic documentation. The prosecution provided detailed discovery, including forensic reports, digital records, witness statements, and expert analyses. The breadth of evidence reduced uncertainty regarding trial outcomes. Before the case proceeded to trial, Warren entered guilty pleas to all major charges. By doing so, he waived his right to trial and admitted responsibility for the offenses as charged. The guilty pleas eliminated the need for a jury trial and spared witnesses and family members from testimony. The court accepted the pleas after confirming they were entered knowingly and voluntarily. The court sentenced Kirkland Warren to life imprisonment, with no possibility of release.
Our family has been torn apart by grief and the endless questions that haunt us every day. Why?
The family of Michelle Melendez and Layla Stewart getting some level of justice tonight as the man who murdered them is sentenced to life in prison. Good evening. Thanks a lot for joining us, everybody. I'm Steve Dunn.
And I'm Deborah Knapp. Kirkland Warren pleaded guilty in the deaths of his former girlfriend and her 7-year-old daughter last month. K2's Emily Gersh joins us live from Vancouver. So, Emily, how did family members of the victims react to seeing Warren in court today?
Yeah, Deb, well, emotions were high in that courtroom today. Family members of Michelle and Layla called Warren a monster, a child molester, and a coward as he left the courtroom in handcuffs.
The loss of Layla has left a void in my heart that can never be filled. Every day, I wake up with the pain, knowing that my little girl will never grow up.
We were brutally murdered and sodomized by a monster, a soulless being put on this planet, a narcissist.
Family members of Michelle Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart, who was only 7 when she was killed, did not hold back at Kirkland Warren's sentencing Tuesday.
We'll never see her smile again or hear her laughter. We'll never see her grow, achieve her dreams, or the life she deserves.
The bodies of Melendez and Stewart were found off a rural road outside Washougal in March 2023, days after they were reported missing. They both had bullet wounds to the head, and DNA matching Warren's was found on Stewart, indicating sexual abuse. The prosecuting attorney choked up multiple times when describing the details of that crime.
To cowardly put their half-clothed bodies thrown down a ravine and to make the family suffer for 10 days searching.
The family's representative and domestic violence advocate, Michelle Bart, was not satisfied with the sentence.
He raped a 7-year-old and then shot her and killed her.
At the time of their deaths, Warren was also wanted for a 2017 murder in Arkansas that he was out on bail for. Bart would have liked to see a stricter sentence to ensure he's never set free.
2 life sentences without the possibility of parole would have been nice.
Now, the mother of Michelle Melendez and grandmother of Layla Stewart was in court today, but a victim advocate read her statement to the judge. It read in part, quote, "The day I lost them, I lost myself. A part of me died with my girls." We're live in Vancouver. Emily Gersh, K2 News.
Emily, thank you.
Additional sentences for related offenses were ordered to run consecutively. The presiding judge cited severity of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the overwhelming evidence when issuing the sentence. The court emphasized that the punishment reflected both accountability and public safety considerations. Family members of Michelle Melendez and Layla Stewart issued public statements acknowledging the legal outcome and emphasizing the importance of accountability. Statements focused on justice rather than personal commentary. Community members organized vigils and memorial gatherings in Vancouver and surrounding areas. These events highlighted the broader impact of the case and reinforced community awareness regarding domestic violence risks. The case prompted renewed public discussion around protective orders, supervision of violent offenders, and systemic safeguards. While the legal process concluded with sentencing, broader questions regarding prevention and intervention remained part of public discourse. The case of Michelle Melendez and Layla Stewart exposed multiple systemic weaknesses that are commonly present in domestic violence, related homicides. These failures did not occur at a single point but developed across time, institutions, and enforcement mechanisms. Each gap compounded risk and reduced opportunity for intervention. Prior to the disappearance, Michelle Melendez had documented interactions with the legal system related to domestic violence. These interactions indicate that the risk factors were not hidden or unknown. The presence of prior incidents, court involvement, and protective measures suggests the situation had already been identified as dangerous. However, intervention mechanisms largely depended on compliance by the restrained individual rather than proactive monitoring. Domestic violence intervention systems often rely on reports of violations after harm occurs. In this case, warning signs existed, but there was no sustained, structured intervention capable of preventing escalation. There was no evidence of mandated counseling enforcement, risk reassessment following violations, or coordinated monitoring across agencies. Additionally, domestic violence cases are frequently handled in isolation, with each incident viewed separately instead of as part of an escalating pattern. This limits the ability of authorities to recognize imminent danger, especially when the victim attempts to disengage from the abuser. A protective order had been issued naming Michelle Melendez as a protected party. Such orders are intended to establish legal boundaries and provide a mechanism for immediate action when violations occur. In practice, enforcement depends heavily on reporting, response speed, and follow-through. In this case, violations of protective order were documented. Despite this, the restrained individual remained in the community. The existence of protective order did not prevent continued contact, nor did it result in immediate containment after breaches. This reflects a broader issue in protective order enforcement. Violations are often treated as secondary offenses rather than indicators of escalating risk. Protective orders do not physically prevent access. Without consistent enforcement, GPS monitoring, or immediate detention following violations, these orders function primarily as reactive tools. The system placed the burden of safety on the protected individual rather than removing the threat entirely. Bail and pretrial supervision decisions played a critical role in this case. The individual later convicted had an extensive criminal history, including prior violent offenses. Despite this background, release conditions did not prevent further access to the victims. Pretrial systems often prioritize court appearance risk over public safety risk. When bail determinations focus primarily on flight risk rather than violence risk, individuals with a history of harm may remain free while awaiting trial or resolution of other charges. Supervision mechanisms were insufficient to detect or prevent violations in real time. There was no continuous monitoring capable of identifying movement, proximity to protected individuals, or possession of prohibited items. This gap allowed conditions to be breached without immediate consequence. Multiple points in the timeline represented potential intervention opportunities. These included prior arrests, protective order violations, and known relationship instability. Each event could trigger reassessment of risk and escalation of protective measures. Law enforcement courts and supervision agencies operate within defined scopes, but the lack of integrated risk assessment prevented a comprehensive response. No single failure caused the outcome. Rather, a sequence of limited responses created conditions where escalation was possible. The case demonstrates how systems often react to incidents individually instead of recognizing cumulative danger. Preventive action requires early identification of patterns, consistent enforcement, and coordinated information sharing across agencies, beyond individuals directly involved. This case reflects broader patterns and risks associated with intimate partner violence, particularly when children are present. The progression observed in this case aligns with well-documented patterns in intimate partner violence. These include escalating control, violations of legal boundaries, and increased risk following attempts to leave the relationship. Separation is consistently identified as a high-risk period for victims. The presence of prior violence, legal intervention, and noncompliance with court orders are established indicators of elevated lethality risk. Despite this, systems frequently lack standardized processes to escalate responses when these indicators accumulate. This case also highlights how prior violent history in other jurisdictions may not be fully integrated into current risk assessments. Fragmented criminal records across states can reduce the perceived severity of risk during bail and sentencing decisions. Children in domestic violence contexts face heightened risk, both directly and indirectly. Even when not the initial target of violence, children may become victims due to proximity, perceived leverage, or attempts to exert control over the primary victim. In this case, the child was fully dependent on the adult victim for safety. The system did not implement protective measures specifically addressing child risk, such as emergency custody review, child-focused safety planning, or temporary protective relocation. Domestic violence frameworks often center on adult relationships, with insufficient emphasis on children's vulnerability during active disputes. This creates gaps in protection when children are present during escalating conflicts. The case prompted public discussion regarding domestic violence enforcement, bail reform, and interagency coordination. Key policy considerations include mandatory risk reassessment following protective order violations, stricter bail conditions for repeat violent offenders, and enhanced monitoring for individuals with documented patterns of noncompliance. There is also increased attention on the need for cross-jurisdiction data sharing to ensure prior violent offenses are fully considered during legal proceedings. Without comprehensive records, decision-makers may underestimate the risk posed by certain individuals. The legal proceedings concluded with guilty pleas to multiple charges, including aggravated first-degree murder and additional violent offenses. The admissions eliminated the need for a trial and formally established responsibility for the deaths. Sentencing resulted in life imprisonment, ensuring permanent removal of the offender from the community. The sentence reflects the severity of the crimes and the court's determination that rehabilitation or supervised release was not appropriate. This outcome represents the final stage of the criminal justice process in this case. It does not reverse the events but establishes legal accountability and long-term incapacitation. Despite the resolution, questions remain regarding earlier system responses. These include whether stricter enforcement, different bail decisions, or enhanced supervision could have altered the outcome. Such questions are common in cases involving documented warning signs and subsequent escalation. The case also raises questions about consistency in domestic violence intervention across jurisdictions and the thresholds required to trigger preventive detention or intensive monitoring. The impact of the case extends beyond legal outcomes. Families experienced permanent loss, and the community was confronted with systemic shortcomings. The case remains a reference point in discussions about domestic violence prevention, child protection, and criminal justice reform. While the legal process reached its conclusion, the broader implications continue to inform policy reviews, advocacy efforts, and public awareness regarding the risks associated with intimate partner violence and enforcement failures. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.